As reported by one of the largest competitive swimming publications in swimswam.com and many others, FINA voted Sunday to ban transgender women from competing in women's categories if they have gone through any part of the male puberty process. At the Extraordinary General Congress held during the World Championships in Budapest, Hungary, the global governing body also announced the creation of an open category that will be developed in the coming months. FINA, the official swimming organization recognized by the International Olympic Committee, had this to say: male to female transgender athletes and athletes with a 46XY DSD or disorders of sexual development whose legal gender or gender identity is female may only compete in FINA competition and set FINA world records in the female category if they can establish they have not experienced any part of male puberty. Athletes who want to establish their eligibility under this standard will be required to show that they have suppressed male puberty beginning as from Tanner stage 2 or at the age of 12, whichever is later, and that they have since continuously maintained their circulating testosterone below the levels of 2.5 nanomoles per liter. Now, before we touch on this momentous announcement and effect on sport as we know it, let's look at how transgender athletes were allowed to compete prior to this. And we're going to use the very controversial case of Lia Thomas. Her story made the rounds on the internet from people who were, in turn, very quick to politicize it. We have one side being a charged up, seemingly anti-trans movement, as well as the other side represented by a very left-leaning group. A good example of this is a Purdue University professor of American Studies and Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies, and this video from NBC News.
After spending 3 years on the men's team, Thomas surpassed the NCAA requirement to compete on the women's squad as a senior, completing 34 months of hormone replacement therapy, far beyond the 12-month NCAA requirement to compete on the women's team. Her presence sparking controversy.
In a previous video, I had made my position very clear. We need to understand how unbelievably difficult it is to make the NCAA Women's Championship, let alone win the 500-yard freestyle, both of which Lia Thomas had done. Secondly, the idea that testosterone levels being the only barrier to entry was not ideal. Lia Thomas had trained in swimming through puberty as a male. She had gone to Penn University and placed at the Ivy League Championships as a male. She then had transitioned and met every hormonal guideline set forth by the NCAA to compete as a woman, and then won a title in an event that is so unbelievably difficult to win that the likelihood of an Olympic medal in the following year or quadrennial from somebody from that caliber is incredibly high. So in the previous example of a left-leaning gender studies professor, they point out that there is a lack of scientific evidence that conclusively demonstrates a link between testosterone and athletic performance. In this claim, if we click the link that she has hyperlinked, we have a Scientific American article that is written by yet another gender studies professor in Rebecca M. Jordan Young, a professor of women's and gender and sexuality studies at Barnard College. But let's, as an exercise, take that claim to be true. There still remains a seemingly obvious advantage that Lia Thomas had when transitioning. I can tell you from growing up in a very serious swimming family that competing at the highest level of the Ivy League is still very intense. My sister was an All-American high school swimmer who went on to Dartmouth, a school that is also in the Ivy League, and to place in the Ivy League championships and even make it to the NCAA championships was something that she had to kill herself in training for, but was never able to do. So I do feel very strongly about this advantage that Lia Thomas had due to her previous and incredibly rigorous training as a male. Then after transitioning, winning one of the most prestigious titles in swimming, at the very least one of the most difficult to win. This advantage can't be negated simply by hormonal testing and suppressing, as the previous rules had stated. Lia Thomas had followed the rules, and Martina Navratilova put this pretty simply, saying that the rules need to change if people have issues. And this is why I believe FINA has made their ruling. Now let's break down the scientific terms in the FINA ruling. The first requirement of a transgender athlete being able to compete in the women's category is athletes who want to establish their eligibility under this standard will be required to show that they have suppressed male puberty beginning as from Tanner stage 2 or at the age of 12, whichever is later. From the National Library of Medicine, Tanner staging, also known as sexual maturity rating, is an objective classification system that providers use to document and track the development and sequence of secondary sex characteristics of children during puberty. It was developed by Marshall and Tanner while conducting a longitudinal study during the 1940s and 1960s in England. Based on observational data, they developed separate scales for the development of external genitalia, the phallus, scrotum, and testes volume in males, breasts in females, and pubic hair in both males and females. So we're only going to look at the male Tanner scale because this rule only affects male puberty as it pertains to transitioning to a female. The stage 2 of pubic hair development is downy hair, and then the stage 2 of testicular volume is 4 milliliters to 8 milliliters, or 2.5 to 3.3 centimeters long. The second part of the bylaw is they have since continuously maintained their circulating testosterone below the levels of 2.5 nanomoles per liter. Most people aren't familiar with nanomoles per liter, so we will convert to the more common nanograms per deciliter, which ends up being 72. This number would be considered hypogonadal, or the extremely low testosterone production for a male, but it would be the highest potential testosterone production for a female that we would see naturally. The 72 nanograms per deciliter level was the standard barrier before, but this could have had some potential downfalls. I imagine the testing for this would have to be much more contingent on the communication between the athlete and the tester. It could then be possible to take advantage of the suppression and then the window wherein the athlete isn't suppressed, and maybe that window lines up to where they could have some peaking level of testosterone when they go and compete. The testes wouldn't be shut down from the hormones permanently, so they could use the time between testing and competing to have some sort of a testosterone boost. But this isn't a guarantee that the athlete in question would do this, just that they could. I realize that scenario may seem pretty unrealistic, but these are the things that governing bodies have to think of. So in the end, we have a new, massively unprecedented and substantial change in the rules for transgender athletes. I'm curious of two things. Will other federations and will the IOC change what they do as well? Are they going to adapt what FINA has said, or are they going to stand strong and continue to use the nanograms per deciliters or hormonal suppression as the guideline? I'm also curious to see what the guidelines on this new potential open category will be. Will there even be enough swimmers in this category? Will the swimmers swim alongside the other category swimmers, but be awarded different medals and records? Time will only tell. Please let me know your thoughts in the comment section, subscribe for more content, and I will see you in the next video.